Christian Horner is not the only reason why Red Bull are in hot water at the moment. There's a lot of talk and deliberation around the ownership of two teams. Now, Red Bull have ownership of, obviously, Red Bull Racing and formerly AlphaTauri, now Visa, Cash App, credit card, debit card, whatever you want to call them. And obviously, this has sparked large debate. Main talking points are coming from Zak Brown, the McLaren CEO. And obviously, I think he has a lot of magnificent points that he makes. At the end of this video, I will put in a clip from Sky Sports, which is where Craig Slater asks a few questions to Zak Brown. So make sure you stay tuned to the end to see what Zak Brown actually had to say if you haven't already seen it before. I'm jumping in the middle of this video and this discussion about Red Bull to let you know to hit that subscribe button down below. It's completely free and it really helps out the channel. Make sure you like and let me know your thoughts about this situation with Red Bull and AlphaTauri. I'm really interested to hear what people have to think on this topic. The basis of the conversation is generally talking about how in other sports, you're not allowed to have two teams in the same league or the same competition. A good example of this recently, which has come to the forefront, is the ownership group, the City Group, who own Manchester City. They have a club in Australia. They have some over Europe. And there's a club in Spain called Girona, who are owned by the City Group. And that discussion has been about if Girona get into the Champions League, how that is going to affect how things work, because obviously you can't have an ownership group own two teams in the same competition. That's just one of the rules in football. Now, there's a lot more to that discussion, and that isn't really relevant to Formula One, but it has the same premise. Like, even Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, whatever you want to call it these days, when it was a junior team, realistically, that shouldn't have been allowed either, but it was allowed because there wasn't another team willing to take that spot. But obviously, for me, I'm not a big fan of one ownership group having two teams in the same competition. I think it would make more sense for Red Bull to have teams in Formula 2 and Formula 3 as feeder teams, but no one team has the same relationship as Red Bull have with their two teams. Now, obviously, if you look behind the scenes, you've got voting for regulation changes, rule changes and all that, where you look at upcoming directives that might be brought in for votes for floors, how the floors are built and things like that, and how many power units teams need to use, gearboxes, etc. Now, obviously, there is engine manufacturers like Mercedes who supply Williams, Aston Martin, McLaren, but their relationship isn't anywhere near as close as a full 100% ownership. And this is where I think it gets a bit sticky. There's a lot of fans that seem to think, oh, well, Mercedes supply engines to McLaren. Mercedes do this. Ferrari do this for Haas. Haas have workers in the Ferrari factory. And, yeah, don't get me wrong, that happens. Power unit suppliers, they need to understand how the power unit works and stuff like that. So there is links there, but it's not to the same level of what Red Bull have with Red Bull Racing and AlphaTauri. And my biggest issue is, and Zak Brown mentions it in the clip, which I'm going to show at the end of the video, the voting. AlphaTauri don't vote based on their best interests. It's based on Red Bull's best interests, which is obviously to have Red Bull Racing winning. There's two cars on the grid that will never aim to win a race. The aim obviously of the drivers is to win the race, but they will never be in a position where, unless there's major problems, like you go back to when Pierre Gasly won in the Toro Rosso, the AlphaTauri, whatever you want to call it, there was big contextual things to that for why he won. He didn't win on pace or merit. There was issues within the race which led to him winning, penalties, etc. Now, don't get me wrong, the AlphaTauri Toro Rosso has won, but the aim of that team isn't to win races. Now, the big problem we're going to see this season is how closely matched is that Alpha Tauri going to be to last year's Red Bull, this year's Red Bull? How much actually goes on behind the scenes between these two teams that no one knows about and no one will ever know about, because unless you're there, you don't know it happens. Now, I don't know how the FIA audit things like this. I don't know how they see what's going on with upgrades, wind tunnel time. I don't understand how that all works behind the scenes. I get that teams have a set amount and all that, but I don't understand how do you check what's been used and who's used it, because I think last season, I think it was brought to the attention by Toto Wolff and maybe even Zak Brown as well, that AlphaTauri had bought something like 6 brand new floors throughout the season, and that's expensive. And Red Bull bring a floor. Now, were AlphaTauri testing parts for Red Bull? Were they not? Who knows? And to be honest with you, we'll never know. There's probably a lot that goes on at that team that we will never know about. Now, obviously, for me, in my personal opinion, I don't think two teams should be owned by one entity, one organisation. I think there was an instance in a race in 2021 where Pierre Gasly just moves out the way of Max Verstappen. Obviously, Max Verstappen in a title battle. We've seen it with Yuki Tsunoda in Zandvoort, where he obviously had an issue with the car and he knew he needed to retire. He brings it into the pits with his belts off, and then he has to stop on track in probably one of the most dangerous positions in the track, where they have to bring out a safety car. Now, for me, it's things like that which then start to go, right, so Red Bull have control over 4 cars. They have control over 2 votes. And realistically, at the moment, they have the FIA in their pocket. I don't know. Like, some people might disagree, but for me, it's quite clear. You only have to look as close as Austin. Sergio Perez went off track. It was seen on onboard cameras. People like myself who'd seen the footage from the onboard cameras, you can clearly see Perez goes off track. No penalties awarded. So it's one of those where the FIA's in the pocket of Red Bull, and that's the way it seems as a fan looking in. Now, obviously, I'm not in those conversations. It could be completely different internally, but it's, again, just another thing on Red Bull's hit list. And for me, when you've had the opportunity to bring in Andretti, now I'm not saying Andretti are going to come in and be winning races. I would not say that, but they've denied Andretti entry, where if Andretti went and bought Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, credit card team, whatever you want to call them, they'd get on the grid. Like, if they bought AlphaTauri, they'd be on the grid, and Formula One probably wouldn't reject that because there's X, Y, and Z already in place. But when you've got teams like Andretti, I think High-Tech's another one who were interested. I believe there was a team from Asia a billionaire from Asia who wanted to get involved. You just think you're allowing one team, one entity to own 2 teams. Why not let these other teams in? Why not at least try and look as if you're not sort of bandishing teams? Now, for me, if you get rid of Toro Rosso, it makes no difference. If someone buys out Toro Rosso, which is what I think the FIA should do, then it makes no difference on the rest of the grid or anything. You just have a new team. And it's not that difficult. They could still use the Honda power units. Like, obviously, this new team might want to relocate and things like that, but like, you look at a team like Andretti, I believe they've already got a Formula One car in the wind tunnel. Now, a team that hasn't even been granted access to the grid yet, having a car in the wind tunnel is massive, in my opinion. They might not come on the grid and be competitive straight away, but you can't expect that from a new team. But obviously, I think this is a massive talking point in Formula One. Let me know what your thoughts are about this down in the comments. I'm going to let you watch the clip of Zak Brown talking to, I believe it's Craig Slater of Sky Sports F1. Let me know your thoughts on that conversation down in the comments. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next video.
There is a bit of a row you've been dragged into, which something you raised, your concerns about one entity owning two teams in F1. So Red Bull, people will know, also have traditionally what's been a junior team, Alpha Tauri, they're calling the RBs this year. You think that's not appropriate, especially for the way F1 is set at the moment. Peter Bayer, we put that to their chief executive, your counterpart there, said, well, Zak Brown, he didn't mention you by name, is not speaking in the wider interests of the sport. That's paranoia speaking. Are you paranoid, Zak?
No, and actually I'm speaking in the wider interest of the sport. If you look at every other major sport, you're not allowed to own two teams. And I'd even go further, there's A-B team relationships. And when these started 15 years ago, it was because there was a huge gap between the top teams and the bottom teams. Now that there's this great budget cap in place, all 10 teams are pretty much running to the cap, so we all it's an equal playing field. So to have two ownerships, I can tell you from sitting in the FIA F1 commission meetings, the voting's always the same, even when in theory it shouldn't be in one of the team's best interest. We've seen it on track, some collaborations going on, and then technically, they've been very forthright in, we're going to take the suspension, etc. And a definition of a constructor is a team who develops their own IP. So I just think the sport's now moved on to an equal playing field. So to have A-B relationships, to have co-ownership of two teams, I think is in a level playing field. It's not what the fans expect. And so the FIA really needs to do something about it.
Well, listen, they're not here to defend those assertions, but we will get their view on that.
Make sure to go and find me on TikTok, pictured here, and Twitter, pictured here. These are the places where I'll keep you all up to date with all my upcoming videos and my thoughts and feelings around the Formula 1 and football weekend.